Dr. Danny Brassell, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Ed, and thanks for spreading some joy around the world. We need a lot more positivity like you.
Yeah, you don't know who you're talking to then. You don't listen to my radio show then.
Oh, you're an affable sort. You're a teddy bear inside. I've listened.
Yeah, I have no problem telling my point of view, but understanding other people's point of view.
Absolutely, we need more of that.
Yeah, that's without a doubt is the biggest problem we have today, is where people don't want to hear somebody else's side of the story.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly asking people, why do you think that way? How come? Because I want to know. I want to understand. Maybe I'm wrong on the subject. I'm never, but that's okay.
Well, you're smarter than me, Ed, because the older I get, the more I realize I know nothing.
No, it's important to understand, especially with podcasts, and one of the things starting this and talking to people, understanding how they got to where they got to,
right,
why they did it that way, understanding the mistakes we make along the way, or what we call inner Edison issues, Edison, whatever you want to call it, but those things that make us greater than we are now because we made this mistake. What did we learn from it? Where are we now? And you need to talk to people and figure out how they did it. And listen to these programs, not just my podcast, but other people's podcasts or books and everything, to find out. And bringing up the book thing, since I just said it, I wasn't going to get there so soon, but it must be an automatic thing, is you have a program to help kids learn how to read. And I wish I had that program when I was a kid, because I hate to read. And then later in life, I only read if it had something to do with what I was trying to do. And that was it. I never read a novel, never read anything. If I wanted to be entertained, I'd go to a TV program.
Yeah, that was my favorite book growing up, was the TV Guide, Ed. Like you, I grew up reading.
I only had 3 channels, so I didn't have much to worry about.
Well, and you and I are from a time period where we could remember where, like, TV just signs off for the day. They play the Star Spangled Banner, and then we're lost until 6 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in the middle of nowhere in Colorado, which was Mayville, and we had the TV antenna, and there was 3 channels. That was it, right? Yeah. And then cartoons were only in the morning for a couple hours if you were lucky.
Yeah, so, that's right. Yeah. That's right.
But let's not talk about yesteryear. But let's talk about your program. Let's first talk about who you are. Basically, why did you? Because you're a doctor that has your PhD. I looked at going back, but then I realized I had to really study and do other things to get a PhD. I actually had to work at it. So I was like, that's not something I want to do. After my master's, I was like, I'm done. This is enough for me. I learned a lot. But why go for a PhD? Do you think so? Tell me your story.
Well, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, Ed. I mean, when I was accepted, I did my doctorate at the University of Southern California. And when I got the acceptance letter, it said, congratulations, you've been accepted in our Doctor of Philosophy program in education. And I turned to my roommate. I'm like, oh, that's what PhD stands for. Not too sharp.
Yeah, USC, so it comes with its own keg, is what you're saying.
That was good. You know what? It was absolutely great, because they actually paid me to get the PhD. I got paid to teach English as a second language to international students. And so not only did I have a 4 years of free education, they actually paid me to teach there. It was just wonderful. You'll never hear a single bad comment from me about the University of Southern California. It was just wonderful. No. And actually, why doesn't everybody have that opportunity? It kind of annoys me. If there's one thing the pandemic taught us, I was watching some program, must have been PBS, because I'm an old guy now. I watch PBS voluntarily. And they made this comment that it would only cost, for every high school senior in America to go to a public university, would only cost taxpayers $1 billion a year. And the question I had is, well, why don't we do that? I mean, the bailout for the pandemic was like $5 trillion. I mean, if it only costs $1 billion, and I'm not saying give it to people for free. I don't believe in giving anything away for free, but we could create our own domestic Peace Corps where we'll pay for your education, but you volunteer at a rest home in Nebraska, or you plant trees in Washington State, or you teach in the inner city. I mean, I think that's how you build better Americans. I had heard one politician, and I'm not going to mention a name, but he had said that the purpose of the American education system was to produce college graduates. And I'm like, no, that's actually not true at all. I mean, first of all, it's not written anywhere in the Constitution that you're guaranteed an education in this country. And second,
not the one I read.
Yeah, and second of all, the purpose of the American education system is to produce tax-paying citizens, and you don't have to go to college to do that. I mean, if you want to learn a trade, like become a welder or a mechanic, I mean, we need these. Actually, these people make more money than a lot of highly educated people nowadays. It's like a question I used to always ask my students. I said, "Well, what's more important, your arms or your legs?" And the kids would look at me like this, and I'm like, well, here's the answer. They're both important. So don't put anybody above another.
So, was this a gradable exam, Professor?
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, really what happened for me was I was a journalist before I was a teacher. And I had the greatest job in the world, but I was drinking in a bar one night, and I was talking to some friends, and I was offered a very good reporter's job at a major daily for $16,500 a year. And then a friend mentioned to me they needed teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So I always tell people I became an educator for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay. And it actually turned out like a lot of things in life. And that's what I love about your podcast is you take something that you didn't think was going to be positive. It turns out to be a huge positive, because I found my passion was for teaching, and teaching in the inner city. I started to notice that a lot of my students didn't have a lot of the advantages I had growing up. I mean, you and I come from similar backgrounds, Ed. I mean, I had both of my parents in my home. We weren't rich, but we never starved. We always had food on the table. And my parents always read to us and in front of us, and we always had plenty of access to reading materials. And I said, shame on me. And I realized that a lot of my kids didn't have those advantages. And, I think schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But here's where kids like you and I fall through the cracks, Ed, is I always ask people, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read, because I've never had to tell a kid, go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read a book. I want them to choose to do it on their own because they love it. And so there's simple tricks that I train parents and teachers and even the students themselves how to get excited about reading, because the more excited you are to read, the more likely you are to read. And the more you read, the better you get. So that's my long answer to a short question, Ed.
All right. Well, you must not know my background, because my parents didn't read to me. And I lost my dad when I was 12, hairy cell leukemia from Agent Orange from being in the Air Force. So for me, it was a totally different thing, right? It was not something that was ingrained in. And this is the same thing with my wife when we talk about why it's important to be there for your kids and do stuff, is because we didn't have that. So we were there for our kids, which is then our kids go, you were so pressuring because you told us. It's like, but you don't understand. We were there for you if you needed us. It's your choice what you want to do, and stop whining about it. Move on.
That's right. Hopefully, just put your kids with kids from dysfunctional homes. They'll start to appreciate you a lot more.
you would think, but it doesn't matter. You can have twins in the same household. They come out completely different and say it's because of how I was raised. It's the choice of the child to figure out how it is, because people from, hard times make hard people, weak time make weak, easy times make weak people, as they make that statement out there. That's not my statement. That's just a repeat of it. And I believe it. And so even though my life was hard, it doesn't mean that I'm saddened by it. That's what made me who I am today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And getting help from other people along the way. And I'm talking about in business and that kind of stuff, and understanding what we need to do. So, but I've never been, I'm just going to offend you, but I always said, if you can't do, you teach. And it doesn't seem that way with you.
Well, and I love it. Woody Allen has an even better line for that. He says, those who can do, those who can't teach, those who can't teach PE, which makes me laugh. But, and I think there's some degree, a lot of truth to that statement. I mean, I kind of thought it was a cop-out when I became a teacher. I thought, oh, wow, I get my summers off and all kinds of things. But then you start to see, like, how I was very blessed. Throughout my life, I've had people that encouraged me. I mean, my wife grew up in the most negative environment on the planet. Everybody telling her what she couldn't do her entire life. Whereas, Ed, I have a photograph of me when I was 4 years old wearing space boots, a San Diego Chargers jersey, a sheriff's badge, and a fireman's helmet, because I was going to be the first ever astronaut, professional football player, police officer, and firefighter. I mean, that's That's the world I grew up in. And I think every kid deserves to grow up in a world like that. And that's really when I started working with my kids. You're exactly right. Even as a parent, I mean, I have 3 kids of my own, and all 3 of them are completely different. I mean, completely different. Same home, but completely different. It's the same thing. I was hoping that the pandemic would alert a lot of people that, wow, now that millions of Americans are forced to involuntarily homeschool their children, I was hoping that they would start to really appreciate all the challenges that teachers face on a daily basis. I mean, you think it's tough with your own kids. Think about having 33 kids in a classroom. All 33 of them are completely different. They all have a different type of fuel that gets them pumped up. And then that actually was what got me excited about teaching. It was like, wow, I was always curious, well, what gets this kid interested? I mean, you and I grew up hating reading. I mean, I remember in high school, I was forced to read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which is a story of Hester Prynne commits adultery. So she's forced to wear an A on her chest. And I raised my hand and asked my teacher if I could wear a B on my chest because I was so bored reading that book. It was the most ridiculous thing ever. And I think about like people that had an impact, you know, now I can't get enough reading biographies or personal development books, or, you know, I've always liked sports books. I mean, I just read a great book about the 3 football coaches of the 1980s, Bill Walsh, Bill Parcells, and Joe Gibbs. And I know you'd love this book. It's called Guts and Glory. And it's basically showing all 3 of these Hall of Fame coaches at their lowest point. I mean, I forgot that Bill Walsh lost his first 7 games as a coach. I mean, he was suicidal, was going to quit. 2 years later, he wins the Super Bowl. Joe Gibbs with the Washington, now they're called the Washington football team.
Yeah.
His first 5 games, he lost his first 5 games. The next year, he won the Super Bowl. Bill Parcells, his first season, he was 3-12-1. He lost. One of his coaches died. One of his best players died. His mother died. His father died. His dog died. I mean, it sounds like a country western song.
Yeah.
And he turned it around, and a few years later, he won the Super Bowl. And what I love about that book is a lot like the profiles on this podcast is all these guys took their biggest adversity and they were able to turn it around and turn it into a learning experience that helped them succeed later. That's what gets me excited about teaching. It's what gets me excited about reading. And, you know, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you have a library card or access to any kind of reading material, I mean, you can read and be mentored by successful people all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's great about today. I want to thank Al Gore for creating the internet, because without him, we wouldn't be here. Only, you know, a third of the people are going to understand what I just said. Basically, what I'm getting at is it's amazing that we have this, and it is important to read people's or listen. I like Audible because I like doing other things at the same time. If I start reading, I start thinking about other things. I don't know what my problem is. You know, I just start phasing off, and maybe it's because I didn't listen to your program, or when as a kid have your program. You know, only one I remember is if there's a will, there's an A. Remember that old bro?
Yeah, that's right.
So how long were you in the inner city?
20 years. I mean, and I love it. I was in Compton and loved my kids, liked most of their parents, but I couldn't stand the bureaucracy in the American education system. I mean, and I try to point this out to people. I mean, it's not easy being a teacher nowadays. I mean, the pendulums, it's like politics in this country. Rather than having civil discussions, people have to go one way or the other. And I'm like, you know, the vast majority of people are right here. And we unfortunately, you know, we're not able to have constructive dialogue because people just like to shout and, you know, you don't learn anything from that. It's actually, if I can share a story, you know, before I was married, I used to have a speeding problem. So I used to spend every weekend in traffic school. And I used to love traffic school. You get to meet really interesting people in traffic school. So one Saturday, the guy to my right had just done 20 years of the state penitentiary. Shaved head, short mustache, tattoos everywhere, baggy shirt, baggy pants. Guy to my left is like a brain surgeon wearing a 3-piece suit, 6'3", spoke just like Stone Phillips. And I'm ashamed to say this, Ed, but I made some judgments about both these guys at the beginning of the day. shame on me, because by the end of the day, I thought the ex-con was the coolest guy I'd ever met in my life. I mean, first of all, he knew every law in the book. He'd say, hey, Danny, man, that ticket you got, that's California Criminal Code 5034, man. You go to this judge, you'll get off. I mean, I was writing notes like crazy. He knew every law in the book. But that's not what made me love him. What made me love him was there was one point in the day where the teacher made each of us stand up, and we had to share with the group our biggest pet peeve about other drivers. You know, and some people stand up and say, I hate it when people change lanes without signaling. You know, some people say, I hate it when people don't come to a complete stop at a stop sign. And then she got to this ex-con, and he's like, nothing. The teacher, she challenges him. She's like, no, sir, please stand up and share with the group what annoys you about other drivers. He leans back in his chair. He's like, nothing, man. Ain't nothing nobody else does that I haven't done before. Holy cow, Ed. I think that's the wisest statement I've ever heard come out of a human being's mouth. I mean, I love how holier than thou all of us are. Oh, I can't vote for that person. That person lied. Oh, please. We are so hypocritical.
No, I mean, and I get it. And back to your point about the pandemic, you thought people would be more appreciative of the schools. I think the people are more appreciative of teachers. I just don't think they like the system, like you said. Yeah. It's swayed away from the parents being able to say what they can and can't. Their kids should be heard. I always thought that we should always do some type of, here's so much money that your family gets per kid, spend it on the school you want. And then the schools would cater to the way it should be, instead of us catering to the schools and the whim of the people running those schools. Because everybody's different. Everybody has a different way of thinking, a different way of doing it. It doesn't mean, you know, some people think that at 5 you should be able to figure out your gender or change everything. And other people think that that's ridiculous. Yeah. I'm not saying anything because my kids are all gone now. It's out of the house. So I have no kids in school. It's not my fight anymore. So
yeah, that's it. You make interesting points, Ed. I mean, that's when people ask me, well, what do you prefer, Danny, private schools or public schools or charter schools? My answer is always yes. You know, some kids
whatever works
for them. You know, some kids, you know, you put them in some kids, you put them in a vocational school and all of a sudden they become excellent. You know, some kids need to be homeschooled. And then addressing, you know, one of the biggest changes that we've seen in education is when you and I were kids, and we went to a parent-teacher conference, you know, parents and teachers talked and they guided the child. Now you go to a parent-teacher conference and the kid is the person running the show, that the kid is like, well, I have all these rights. And I was taught, no, you respect your elders. And again, I don't have to agree with adults, but I always have to respect my elders. And it's kind of crazy to me now in schools they don't do enough of that. Like I just think that we're going down a slippery path. And it's, you know, as a teacher, I've been to so many workshops about marginal things. I'm like, you know, how about we focus on how do I teach the kids how to read? You know, how do I build my kids' character so that they're honest and they, you know, they're good, trustworthy people. I mean, these are things that are important to me, not this, there's a lot of this silliness, which is on the margins of society, which I'm like, well, that doesn't really apply to anything on a day-to-day basis.
Right. I was smiling.
It's just not the most important thing.
Yeah. Right. I was smiling because you were talking about kids have rights, right? I remember my wife's oldest, the one I adopted her 3 kids, and she was like, I'm going to call CPS. And my wife's like, okay, let me beat the shit out of you so it's worth the call. You know, because they think they have these rights and they don't want to get in trouble and never been spanked. And then they get, you know, I mean, that whole thing is like, okay, you're a kid.
Yeah.
The police is going to come and say, did you not listen to your parents like you're supposed to do? That's not going to, it's, you know, I understand there are some bad apples out there on the parent side have made it worse. Just like when I was paying child support, there's, you know, dads before me who never paid. So I had to pay the, you know, because of that. I get all that, but there's nothing you can do about it. But let's get on to a better subject than that. But the school system that you're part of, the reason I asked how long you're in, because that's a long time to be in South Central, you know, down in LA. Because if you don't know where he's talking about, Compton, it is not the greatest place to live. And you would think that people would leave the area and go to places that is cheaper to live a better life, but they don't. They stay in the neighborhood and they stay there forever.
Well, actually, it's a transient community, Ed. It's so like in the, people don't realize in the 1950s, it's where the former NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle was born in Compton, went to Compton Community College. Duke Snyder, the LA Dodger, it was a predominantly white community in the 1950s. In the 1970s, it had transformed into a primarily African American community. In the 1990s, it had become more of a Latino community. And there's indications that it's going to start reflecting more of a Southeast Asian mold here in the next 10 to 15 years. So it's interesting. But I love the people there. I absolutely, I had a great experience there. And, even though I was making a lot of money as a public school teacher, I decided to tutor kids after school for the fun of it. And it was just such a great experience because I was teaching in the hood in the daytime and I was tutoring in a very affluent suburb in the evening. And just listening to the differences and perspectives between the parents and kids was fascinating to me. I mean, I joke, I was doing a training once in Beverly Hills and a principal, I had asked her if she had parent involvement problems at her school. And she said, "Oh yeah, we don't have enough parking spaces." I'm like, wow, you just totally interpreted this question in a totally different way. And then it was kind of funny because it turned out it was kind of a problem because all the kids in Beverly Hills, all their parents had been divorced like 4 times and they all had like 4 sets of parents coming. I just thought that was fascinating. And I'm like, wow, they are legitimate. When I was teaching at the university, I had the very first 2 questions I had from teachers. One teacher said, "Well, I teach in Watts and none of my kids have a pen or paper." And then I had a teacher from Palos Verdes that's like, "Well, of my 14 students, 13 of them have laptops. What do I do for the kid that doesn't have a laptop?" And I'm like, wow, you are coming from totally different points of view. They're both legitimate, but I'm like, wow, this is interesting how different. And this is kind of what really got me interested in education. The more I was into it, I'm like, well, wait a sec. Every kid should have a fair shot. I don't believe in equality. I don't think there is such a thing as equality, but there is an opportunity to give everybody fair chances. And so that's where I got passionate about, because it really ticked me off that a lot of my kids grew up with a lot of disadvantages that I never knew growing up.
Right. But I mean, first thing my dad taught me, life wasn't fair. And it was a good, we need to know that because otherwise we're not going to go do things that we want to do or do other stuff because, everybody has an opportunity in life to do what they want. It's just a choice of how to get there. Because after my dad died when I was 12, we moved to the other side of town. I mean, not the good side of town, the really out there, and that's where I grew up and still went to the same high school everybody else went to, but it was a totally different thing. I was telling somebody the other day, it's like I had 3 shirts and 2 pair of pants and 1 pair of shoes, right? And that's okay. That's what I learned. I ended up working on my grandfather's dairy, doing all this other stuff to make more money so that I could get what I wanted. But that is a choice. Other people go, "Well, I'm such a poor person." I understand that. So when people say that we all are born one way, it's not the fact. Everybody could be, whether you're white, any color, can be in the same situation.
Yeah, that's really inspiring, Ed. I appreciate you sharing that. It's one of the things I say that annoys people is because when I always tell beginning teachers, I'm like, you got to read the inspirational teaching books, you got to watch the inspirational teaching movies, and a lot of my the teachers I used to teach, they'd be like, "Oh, my favorite teaching movie is Dead Poets Society." I'm like, that's absolutely my least favorite teaching movie. The movie that inspired me to become a teacher was Stand and Deliver. And so I like to show them the differences between Dead Poets Society and Stand and Deliver. And it applies to exactly what you were just saying, Ed, because Stand and Deliver is the true story of Jaime Escalante going to Garfield High School in East Los Angeles to teach advanced placement calculus. Dead Poet Society is a fictional account of Robin Williams going to a prep school up in New England. Well, Robin Williams, he inspires his kids to be excited about school through poetry. And Jaime Escalante, he inspires his students to be interested in mathematics, specifically in calculus. Well, then there's an interesting thing between both movies. So in Dead Poet Society, one of the kids, the poetry that he's been exposed to shows him that there's a world out there I've never known, but I'm trapped in my wealthy family. And so he commits suicide. And the school didn't like how Robin Williams was an unorthodox teacher, and so they get all of his students to sign some kind of petition that gets him fired, and they kind of feel bad about it. And so at the end, as he's leaving his last day of school, they're feeling bad, and then one decides to stand up on his desk, and he recites one of the poems that Robin Williams got them inspired with. He goes, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," and they all stand on their desk, "Oh, Captain, my Captain." And Robin Williams leaves. He's like, "Wow, they like me. I hate that message. I don't give a hoot if the kids like me." He didn't teach them anything, because if he was a good teacher, he would have taught them, hey, life is unfair. You got to fight for your rights every now and then. Stand and deliver. The kids take the AP calculus exam and they're accused of cheating because they all passed it. No, they're Latino. There's no way they could have passed the exam. And so what does Jaime Escalante do? He gets the kids to take the damn exam again. He's like, life ain't fair, and this is what life does to you. That's a teacher, because life is not fair. And he prepared them. Hey, you're going to have bumps in the road. You can either whine about it using your language, or you can do something about it. And that's what I want. I want to inspire my kids. I'm like, hey, you know what? The best learning experiences in our life come from our biggest failures, our biggest defeats. And the people that succeed in this world are paying attention to those moments and recognize that this is the moment that shapes who I am. So there's my riff on Dead Poets Society. It always drives me nuts.
No, it's funny because it reminds me when I was in high school, we got accused, our whole class got accused by our teacher for cheating, right? So he made us take this test again. Well, it was the same test. So we all passed it again because we did cheat. But anyway, it's like, all right, if you're going to make us take a test again, change it around so people didn't memorize the answers or whatever it is, But yes, I cheated once in my life. Actually, I was planning on cheating on another test, and I learned that. So I started studying. I started writing the stuff down and whatever. And it was amazing that after that, I remembered it. And so I realized that I have one of those memories that I can remember. If I just do it 3 times, I can remember certain things. And so after that, I never really had to study hard anymore. I just learned how to study my way.
Right? Well, that reminds me of a story, because I hated reading, and it wasn't until 7th grade. My 7th grade reading teacher was a guy by the name of Will Hobbs, who wound up becoming a best-selling young adult author. Will was the guy to get me interested in reading for the first time. He had 5,000 books in his classroom. And every day at the beginning of class, he would tell us what he was reading. We would tell him what we were reading. And the rest of the 50-minute period, we read. Whenever you finished a book, you'd go up to Mr. Hobbs. He'd put down the book he was reading. He'd ask you 3 or 4 questions. And if he was satisfied with your answer, he gave you a point. Every book up to 200 pages is worth 1 point. Every extra 100 pages is worth another point. You needed 25 points to get an A, and the top 5 point totals had their names written on the board. And I wanted my name written on that board. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, 500-page book, 4-point book. Also, an excellent Disney film starring James Mason and Kirk Douglas. And I didn't really feel like reading a 500-page book, so I took the book up to Mr. Hobbs. He asked me 4 questions, and I learned a valuable lesson that day, Ed. Books aren't always like the movies.
That's right.
And guess what Mr. Hobbs did? He gave me the 4 points. And that was one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned, because I felt so guilty. I read every word of every page of every book from that point forward. I wound up with 44 points, well above and beyond what I had to do. He used the single greatest strategy, and this is one of the strategies I use with people now all the time. He used the single greatest strategy I've ever seen a teacher use to get a kid excited about reading. He found out what I was excited about, which was football. At least once a week, he'd bring me a book. He's like, hey, Danny, check out this book on John Elway. I know you'll like it. What are the odds I open up that book? In my experience, all age levels, 100%. Kid might not read it, but they're going to open it. And I find that by the 4th time, the kid's going to try and read that book, because there's nothing more powerful than somebody significant in your life, a teacher, a coach, a pastor, a parent, a buddy, saying, you know what? I was thinking of you when I was reading this. I guarantee you, Ed, you were telling me you don't like to read, but I guarantee you I'd get you excited about reading. And you said something which counts. We were talking before the broadcast. Audible counts. Our research is really clear on this. It's just as good to be read aloud to read on your own. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't know this. Over half of the Fortune 500 CEOs are dyslexic. And I don't know if you know this, but dyslexics tend to be very good auditory learners. And one of the things that I always encourage dyslexics to do is, hey, listen to the books. That's going to help you process lots of information. So, I mean,
and tune it up to 1.5. I like it 1.5 to almost 2.
Yeah, sometimes I just can't do that.
I didn't realize it was an accident when I was walking in San Diego. When I was walking, I was staying there waiting for another day for another conference. I was walking and I went, and I was like, oh, wow. Let me see if I can do 2. Oh, that's a little too fast. We'll take it down a little bit. But it's like, wow, I can get through a book so much faster now listening to it.
I love it.
Yeah. And so for me, that's what I like to do because I can retain it much better listening. Plus, I can, focus on. I can do walking and listening to it at the same time, or working out, or lifting, or whatever I'm doing. And that's what I like. But I think it's very important to understand and assimilate other people's information that they put on pages, whether it's by voice or if you like reading. My wife loves to read; she can go through tons of books. It's not me.
Well, but again, let's broaden the definition of reading, Ed. I mean, you are a reader. You're listening to Audible. It's just different.
I know, but thank God there was Audible.
Yeah. I mean,
and thank goodness you can actually do PDFs too that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
For this, I was listening to some other people, as you're saying, having issues who to read, but then when they do the PDFs and they can actually out loud them, and that was amazing.
Wow. And you strike upon something that's important, Ed, is because I think a lot of people associate reading. They think it's got to be Dostoevsky, like 800-page books. I always tell audiences, I'm like, for those of you who have that large book on your bedside table that you started 3 years ago, I absolve you of that book. Get another one. You
mean the Bible?
Well, I read the Bible. Bible's a positive. It's a positive.
No, I mean that big thick book that no one reads.
Yeah, I'm not going to read the Bible in one sitting. I mean, and some of those. The book of Numbers isn't exactly like compelling reading. It's a lot of bagats, and when I'm reading the Bible, it's interesting because my men's Bible study, I just read it a little bit differently than people because I think there's a lot of funny stories there. I mean, one of my favorite stories is Genesis 50:20, when Jacob has passed away. Joseph's brothers are all freaking out. They're like, uh-oh, now that dad's dead, now Joseph is going to avenge all the bad stuff we did to him. And so they go up to Joseph and they're really swarmy. They're like, hey, Joe, Dad said before he died, all that bad stuff we did to you, you're not supposed to take vengeance out on us. And it's actually one of the nicest stories in the Bible because Joseph looks at his brothers and says, oh man, dude, this is paraphrasing.
I understand because I don't remember the dudes in there myself.
God meant for good, and it's a beautiful story. But I always tell people that can't handle all the Bible. I'm like, one of the things that got me interested in the Bible was reading my Robert Schuller children's picture Bible to my kids because now I know where all the stories are in the Bible, and my kids enjoy it. I'm like, oh, that got me interested in reading the actual text. And I read Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life. I think it was page 34, he said, if you haven't read the Bible, take 10 minutes a day. It'll take you a year. Only took me 10 months, but I enjoyed it.
All right. So we've been all over your education and reading and how important in the program that you have for people. We didn't really get into it. But I know you wrote a book on 33 unique ways to think and act like a successful leader, right? I just want to make sure I quoted it right. That's what I was looking over there.
There it is right there. Leadership begins with motivation. Yeah. And this book was actually, I wrote this book when I was in middle school. I taught all age levels, and from kindergartners all the way to rocket scientists. But when I was teaching,
because you've written many books before we get. How many books have you written?
16. I'm writing 17 and 18 as we speak right now. Okay. They're going to be really cool. This book, Leadership Begins with Motivation. I was inspired to write this when I was a middle school teacher. I was the only teacher in the history of my school not to have any tardy students because I always started off my class by reading aloud a Paul Harvey story. When I was growing up, I used to listen to Paul Harvey on the radio every single day.
My grandfather did in the dairy every time I went there.
He passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 325.
This is Paul Harvey.
Yeah. There's a Paul Harvey with the rest of the story. And he always talked about things, and we're always trying to guess who's he talking about or what company or whatever. But when I read those stories to the kids, a lot of those stories are about like J.C. Penney and Sears Roebuck, and like kids today, they don't even know what I'm talking about. And so I wrote this book to have those little short stories to get kids excited about reading, just with things that are a little bit more updated. So here, I'll read a quick one to you. This is how I would start off class. So on the morning of January 17th, 1977, Gary Gilmore, in a plain t-shirt, strapped into a chair with a bag over his head, awaited a firing squad of 5 law enforcement officers to execute him at the state prison in Draper, Utah. Convicted of murdering a gas station employee and motel manager in Utah the year before, Gilmore would be the first person in the United States to be executed in nearly a decade. Shortly before his execution, prison officials asked Gilmore if he had any last words. Neither he nor anyone else that day would know the impact of those words. Over 10 years later, in 1988, Dan Whedon, an advertising executive who co-founded the Whedon and Kennedy Agency in Portland, Oregon, made something of a morbid pitch to a struggling fashion company. He recalled the inmates' final words and used a slight variation for his pitch, and seemingly everyone hated his idea for the company's new slogan. "Just trust me on this one," Whedon implored the company's co-founder. And the co-founder, his company, and the public have not looked back since. The co-founder's name was Phil Knight. The struggling brand he co-founded was a shoe company called Nike. An advertising executive, Dan Whedon, slightly altered death row inmate Gary Gilmore's final words, "Let's do it," into the phrase, "Just do it." See, these are the types of stories kids, I don't care who you are. I've used those stories with kids all around the world, and all of them are sitting there just listening. And this is how you get kids excited about reading.
And there you go. No, I remember Paul Harvey, because my grandfather would, like I said, he had a dairy, and he'd have that on every morning when he was in there milking, and you come in and, it's Paul Harvey.
He's fantastic. Absolutely.
And the one thing that he did, just like the other major radio show person before him, I can't think of his name right now, but they made it about you. They talked to you. They didn't talk to everybody. They talked to you. And that's important at any message you do, that you're talking to you.
Absolutely. Right. Well, there's the podcast I love right now is, it's gotten kind of long, but it used to, when it was short, it was great. It was Mike Rowe's The Way I Heard It. Mike Rowe was the narrator for like Deadliest Catch, which is one of my, it's my guilty pleasure watching Deadliest Catch. My wife, she's like, "Why do you watch this stupid show?" I'm like, "Oh, you got to watch this episode, honey. It's the one where we find out how many crab they caught," which is every episode.
Yeah, I mean, and that's important. Whatever makes, what you like to do and what you want your world to be. So after you were in LA for 20 years, you retired. Now you're in Colorado, right? You said Denver?
Yeah, in Colorado.
What made the big move there? Tax reasons?
My wife is smarter than me. I think women are much smarter than men.
They are. They're much smarter.
Kids, and my wife wanted all of them to eventually be able to own houses near us. And California, the real estate market's crazy. And it's turned out,
especially in LA. If you're in LA, forget it. Yeah.
I mean, and LA compared to San Francisco looks like a bargain. It's crazy. I mean, it's just crazy. I don't know how people do it. So we've been really blessed. And
but now I don't know how people do it in Denver. So
what's that?
Now people can't do it in Denver.
Yeah, I know. It's the pandemic is real. I mean, now I think we're gonna have to move everybody to Wisconsin or something. Wisconsin's beautiful too.
Yeah, well, as long as
every American should get to travel this country. There's places, because I speak all over the world, there's so many places I've been treated to where I'm like, what? Eastern Kentucky and West Virginia is some of the most beautiful country I've ever seen. And I would have never gone there had I not been speaking there. And it's just like, wow. I mean, if I was ever president, I'd give everybody 10 grand to travel the country and quit their griping, because we live in a beautiful country, and people aren't these extremists that you see portrayed in the media. Most people are really good, down to earth people. And there's a great book about that. It was Peter Jenkins wrote it, A Walk Across America. He wrote it back in like the early 1970s. And he's like this hippie backpacking. He hiked across America. And one of my favorite scenes in the book was he went to Alabama, where the Southern racist governor, George Wallace, was there. And he had a meeting with George Wallace, not George McGovern, totally different people. But George Wallace he sits there and he listens to this guy for 2 hours, and he's asking him all these questions about his trip across America. And it's just it's what you were talking about at the beginning of this podcast, Ed. I'm like, isn't it nice? You get people from totally different sides of the tracks or points of view, but they can still have a civil conversation, listen to one another. You don't have to agree with everything, but you can learn a little bit. And then you realize, oh, we're both human beings. It's one of my favorite things to listen to is StoryCorps with National Public Radio. They had this duo on a couple of weeks ago. It was this redneck guy who was at a Trump rally with a Make America Great Again hat, and somebody knocked his hat off of his head, and this woman wearing a hijab, she got them away from him and gave him back his hat. And so they had this conversation together, and he's like, well, why did you do that for me? And she's like, well, I've had people put down my hijab and try and take my hijab off my head, and when I saw somebody take your cap off, I just was very offended for you. And it was beautiful, Ed. They're totally different people, but they had this human connection. And I'm like, that's what I want people to hear about, is the positive things, not all the negativity you hear all the time. I mean, when I was a journalist, I became a journalist because I wanted to be the next Charles Kuralt and do all these stories about America. And instead, they put me on the political beat, which was like a death sentence. Probably the best investment I made during the pandemic is I have this spray bottle. So now when people talk politics to me, I just spray them in the face. I'm like, get away. I don't want negativity.
Yeah, for me, I do a radio show, but and we talk a little politics just because that's your community that you're in and everything about it. But as I say, most of us, whether a Democrat or Republican, independent, most of us are in the middle. You just have those fringes on the outside that are louder than everybody else. And I keep getting yelled at because I said, it's like that big fat lady in the bar that's so loud because she wants all the attention. And then you're sitting in their room trying to eat and you're hearing all this and you get up and leave. And that's the problem, is up in the middle, instead of dealing with it and focusing on it and telling them they're wrong, we get up and leave and don't do anything about it. We need to do something about it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
And I apologize to any overweight woman that I offended by saying what I said.
You'll get letters.
Well, no, you've been in the, or it could be just that woman in the bar who's so loud and obnoxious because she wants the attention. And it's like, you don't have to be that person. Same with the right or the left extreme. We don't need that. We really don't. And we need to bring everybody back together and stop utilizing what they're doing to make us fight with each other so we don't see what they're doing. And I'm not trying to be a conspiracist. I'm just saying that's kind of how it is out there.
I completely agree, Ed. I mean, I had hoped that the pandemic would bring people together. Instead, people decided to make it into a political issue. And I'm still now convinced that what we really need is an asteroid to be headed at planet Earth. And I guarantee you, America, China, Russia, everybody would rally to figure out how to destroy this asteroid. Humans are amazing. When they're pushed in a corner, I always get the story that over 100 years ago, there was a horrible environmental crisis because basically there was so much horse manure on the planet. It was causing all these gases and destroying the environment. And people were trying to figure out how to solve the problem. And one man solved the problem. His name was Ford.
Sorry, I was just guessing.
I love it. That's exactly right, Ed. You got it. And believe me, look at this. Look at everything we try to do to destroy the Earth. Earth's always going to win at that. I mean, we're seeing all these emissions go up and everything. So what did Earth do? Caused a global pandemic so nobody could drive for a couple of years. It's amazing how low the emissions went during the pandemic. And I'm like,
yeah, but I think that was all the factories in China and India and Russia that was shut down. So more than anything else, because if you look at the United States, we produced so much less of all that. But
now we do.
Huh?
But before we did.
Well, yeah, I remember LA when I used to go down there in the early 80s and stuff. You couldn't see the downtown. It was all smog. But that had a lot to do with what we were producing and how we were producing certain things. The issue now is, and I always say this, you have to go with electric car. That is the future. That is the best thing. If you look at what we do to the earth to make that battery by destroying it to get those rare earth minerals, and the fact that we can't do anything with them when it's dead 10 years later, you might want to rethink that. And
no, Ed, I think that's a valid conversation. I love conversations like that because you're very much like me. I'm a contrarian. I like to be the devil's advocate when people are all one way or the other. And I'm like, if there's one thing that I have learned is don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right. But when we're talking about, you would hope the pandemic, I think the biggest thing that we need to look at this time voting is you have to vote policies. You can't vote personalities, right? And that's when you vote. If you don't look at the policies and you only vote a certain way, because I've heard some people, I like the way he looked. This is the governor of California. Oh, he's such a nice guy, and look what he did to us. That's one side. I'm just saying that both sides I'm throwing out there. You have to look at what the policies are and where you want your state to go. Where do you want your United States to go? And that's where you need to vote. And I think, unfortunately, we vote not really thinking about that. We just vote for the moment. And I tell everybody, if you don't understand what you're voting for, don't check the box, right? Because that's the worst thing you can do. You check the wrong box and things passes. And you need to make sure you know what you're voting for and the people you're voting for. Research them, find the background. Don't just go off of what they wrote up about them. Search them.
Research. You see, you go back to what the founding fathers said. The founding fathers, they wrote it in the Constitution that it would only be landowners would have a stake in the voting, and now we gave the vote to anybody. You see some of these ballots, and you're voting for judges you've never heard of. I honestly think the way we should vote, it should be the eighth caller of the radio station. Whoever the eighth caller is, that they get to be the president, senator, the governor. And people laugh at me when I say that, but I'm like, there's actually historical precedent for this. That's actually how the Greeks did the Senate. It was basically like jury duty for a couple of years. And if we did it like that in America, well, it gets money out of the equation. I've seen plenty of poor people go into political office, but I've never seen a person leave political office poor.
No. And that's the problem, right? It was supposed to be you'd leave your community for 4-8 years and then come back to it and tell, and use that what you learn. Now it's you leave, you come back 30 years later, and you're worth $650 million now, because you got Visa founder shares and other stuff. I'm sorry, that's Nancy Pelosi, by the way. No, I'm just saying, but you shouldn't be able to make money off of it. You shouldn't be able to trade stock. You should, if you go there, short period of time and come back, and then it would be public service, not a professional for the rest of your life.
I'm loving this conversation. I wish I had more this is really what we need. I don't understand why people can't just have this. I had actually pitched a show when I lived in LA to a producer, and it was going to be called Common Grounds. And basically I'd be the host, and we'd have somebody from this side of the aisle and somebody from this side of the aisle, and we'd all share a libation of choice together. And I'd give them a different issue every week. And what they had to do was they had to figure out the common ground. Because people have their opinions, I get that, but you're not going to get anywhere by calling people jerks. I mean, what you have to do is figure out, well, where do we agree on things? Okay, if we can agree here, well, let's get that done. These other issues, I'm not saying they're not important, but getting nothing done is not an option. We need to act, and this is something I'm teaching students all the time, is be part of the solution. Anybody can gripe, and this is something I point out to people that like to gripe about politicians. I'm like, well, that person did something that you and I haven't done. They ran.
Right. Exactly.
Teddy Roosevelt said the credit belongs to the person that's in the arena. Anybody can gripe about anything, but you want to be part of the solution. And I appreciate a forum where we're able to talk civilly. We don't have to agree. I mean, my wife and I disagree on things all the time, but it doesn't mean I don't love and respect her.
Okay. But you still do the dishes, right?
We have an agreement. Before the kids, the agreement was that I was always right and she always got her way. But since we've had the kids, the agreement is she's always right and she always gets her way, which seems to work for our relationship.
That's how it always is. Once you get there, you have a happy life.
Yep.
Happy wife, happy life, no matter what. I really enjoyed this, and I want to talk to you after we get done here for a couple more seconds.
Absolutely. But before
anything else you want?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure as a gift to everybody for bearing with me for 45 minutes. I wanted to give everybody a copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. So if you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, again, freegiftfromdanny.com, I'm going to give everybody a complimentary copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed, which is a book I wrote for a school principal who was trying to keep his faculty positively engaged. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that demonstrates the same concept. You can read that in 5 minutes. We need to have a lot more positivity in the world. We need a lot more people that are part of the solution, not part of the problem. So that's my gift. If anybody that's listening to this podcast is part of the solution because they're trying to make themselves better. So I thank you for providing this forum, Ed, and I'm excited about our conversation off the air.
No, I just what you brought up about the program you wanted to do. But I appreciate you coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. I had a great time talking to you, having a conversation. These are the best podcasts, which is just have a conversation, kind of talk about a few different things, and that's what people like. And then we bring it back together at the end. And again, thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Danny Brassell. So much. I appreciate it. Thanks, you. And please go out and get his book, and especially since he said it was free.
Thanks. God bless.